Snow fell in slow motion outside the window, blanketing the old pine trees until the whole world looked washed in silver. I remember the hum of the heater and the creak of the wood floor beneath my socks as I walked across the cabin. It was my first winter alone in years, or at least that's what I thought. Ryan had offered me his family's place in the mountains, a week away from the noise of Portland and the memories that still scratched at the back of my mind. I said yes because I needed silence, not realizing silence can sometimes be louder than anything else. Ryan arrived the next day with his fiancé, Caleb. I'd met him once before, briefly, at a summer barbecue, but I hadn't really paid attention. This time was different. When he stepped into the cabin carrying bags and brushing snow off his jacket, something in the room felt instantly warmer. He had that kind of presence that didn't ask for attention but still drew it, like the way a fireplace draws your eyes without meaning to. Ryan was the same as ever, loud, funny, half-shouting every story. He filled the cabin with energy, cracking open beers and turning on music. Caleb smiled politely, standing a little behind him, quieter, more observant. I caught his eyes once across the room. He smiled just enough to acknowledge the moment, then looked away. It should have meant nothing, and maybe it did at the time. Still, I noticed. Dinner was loud with laughter. Ryan teased me about being single again, about living with my books and coffee mugs. I laughed it off. Caleb nudged him and said, "Don't pick on him. At least Noah knows how to cook." That small defense made me look up. Caleb's tone was gentle, protective in a way I didn't expect. Ryan rolled his eyes, kissed him on the temple, and changed the subject. But the echo of Caleb's words stayed in the room like faint music. Later, after dishes and wine, Ryan went outside to call his sister. The fire had burned low. Caleb stayed behind gathering mugs. I stood beside him, both of us pretending to be occupied with small things, the sound of glass, the crack of logs settling. He asked how I was really doing. No one had asked me that in a while. I told him the truth, that I wasn't sure, that sometimes it felt like my life had been rearranged while I wasn't looking. He listened, nodding, his hands still busy with the mugs. When Ryan came back in, the moment vanished. We all said goodnight. I went to my room, changed into a sweatshirt, and sat at the edge of the bed, watching frost crawl across the window. The silence pressed down heavy. I thought about old mistakes, about people I'd loved and lost, about how fragile everything felt. Sometime past midnight, a soft knock broke the quiet. I hesitated before opening the door. Caleb stood there holding 2 mugs of cocoa, steam curling into the cold hallway air. He smiled, almost apologetic. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Ryan's snoring and it's freezing in that room. Mind if I hang out for a minute?" I stepped aside without thinking. He came in, set the mugs on the nightstand, and sat on the chair by the window. For a while, we just listened to the wind pressing against the cabin walls. Then he said softly, "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's story? Like you got written into the wrong chapter?" I looked at him, and something in his voice made my chest tighten. I said, "All the time." We talked quietly after that, about jobs, families, the ways people change when they think love will stay forever. He told me he and Ryan had been together 5 years, but lately felt like roommates. He didn't sound angry, just tired. I told him how hard it was to rebuild trust once it's cracked, how loneliness sneaks in even when you share a bed with someone. He nodded, looking at the mug in his hands. There was no music, only the tick of the heater. Outside, snow kept falling. At one point he laughed, softly, like he was surprised he still could. The sound loosened something in me. We weren't close enough to touch, but it felt like the distance between us had shrunk without moving. I caught his eyes again. He held the gaze a second too long, then looked back at the window. The air between us was charged, delicate, filled with everything neither of us dared to say. When he finally stood, the room felt smaller. "Thanks," he said quietly. "For the company." He left 1 mug behind, still half full. The door clicked shut, and I sat there listening to the echo of his footsteps fade down the hall. I didn't know what any of it meant, or if it meant anything at all. All I knew was that the night suddenly didn't feel as cold as before, and somewhere deep down, Something had begun to stir that I thought I'd buried with the last snow of the season. The next morning began with the faint crackle of the fireplace and the smell of pine drifting through the cabin. Light filtered in through the frosted windows, painting the room in soft shades of gold and gray. Noah woke early, unable to shake the memory of Caleb's visit the night before. The image of him standing in the doorway, cocoa in hand, lingered like a dream he wasn't sure had really happened. Downstairs, Ryan was already bustling around, making coffee and talking on his phone about a client meeting he had to attend in town. "Shouldn't take long," Ryan said between sips, flashing his usual grin. "Caleb, you and Noah can hold down the fort, yeah?" Caleb nodded from the table, half smiling, eyes still tired. Once Ryan's car disappeared down the snow-covered road, the cabin fell into silence again. The quiet was thick, broken only by the hum of the heater and the occasional crack of ice sliding off the roof. Noah sat by the window with a notebook open, though the page stayed blank. He felt Caleb's presence before he even looked up. "Writer's block?" Caleb asked, leaning against the doorframe, his voice still husky from sleep. "More like thought overload," Noah replied, smiling faintly. Caleb laughed, the kind of low, easy laugh that made the air around them feel warmer. He came closer, holding 2 mugs of coffee this time. "Then you need caffeine, not solitude," he said, setting one down beside Noah. They spent the morning talking, first about books, then about photography, then about everything that didn't matter and everything that did. Caleb showed him photos on his camera, cityscapes at sunset, road trips, a picture of Ryan laughing with wind in his hair. "That one used to be my favorite," Caleb said quietly. Before I realized how much of it I was taking alone, Noah didn't know what to say. He recognized the tone, that fragile mix of love and disappointment that only surfaces when someone has been holding too much inside. He closed the notebook, not needing words to fill the silence. The look in Caleb's eyes said enough. By noon, snow began to fall again, heavier this time. The two of them decided to go for a walk down the trail behind the cabin. The world outside looked untouched, perfect in its stillness. They didn't speak much, only listened to the crunch of their boots and the wind moving through the trees. Every few steps, Caleb would glance over, as if wanting to say something but thinking better of it. Eventually, he did. "Do you think people fall out of love because they stop trying?" he asked. "Or because they realize they shouldn't have tried in the first place?" Noah took a moment before answering. "Maybe both. Maybe we get so used to the idea of love that we forget to notice when it's not really there anymore." Caleb nodded slowly, eyes down on the snow. "I used to think Ryan and I were forever, but lately it feels like we're just maintaining a promise. Like if we stop smiling, the whole thing will fall apart." Noah wanted to tell him he understood, that he'd once lived in the same hollow version of love, too afraid to leave, too guilty to stay. Instead, he said, "Sometimes silence between two people says more than words ever could." Caleb looked at him then, eyes filled with something unspoken. They walked back to the cabin in that same quiet. The fire had burned low, so Noah added another log, watching the flames catch. Caleb sat on the rug beside the fireplace, stretching his legs out, staring into the glow. "You know what I miss most?" he said softly. "Being seen. Not as someone's partner, not as half of a couple. Just me." Noah lowered himself to the floor nearby. "That's not selfish," he said. "Everyone wants to be seen." The heat from the fire brushed against their faces. Neither moved closer, but the air between them felt charged, fragile. Caleb turned to him, voice barely above a whisper. "You make it easy to talk." Noah smiled faintly, his throat tight. "Maybe that's all I'm good at." "That's enough," Caleb said. The look in his eyes lingered, heavy with meaning. For a moment, Noah thought he might lean in, but Caleb turned back to the fire instead, his shoulders tense. Hours passed like that, quiet conversation, comfortable pauses, glances that lasted too long. The day faded into evening, and snow piled higher outside. They made dinner together, laughing at how Ryan always bought the wrong kind of pasta. The laughter felt unguarded, real. It was the kind that makes you forget, just for a second, what shouldn't be happening. As night settled over the mountains, the cabin dimmed to a soft orange glow. Caleb stood by the window, looking out into the storm. "He should have been back by now," he murmured, though his voice lacked worry. It was almost like he didn't want the night to end. Noah joined him, their reflections side by side in the glass. Two figures blurred by falling snow. Caleb's hand brushed his, a fleeting touch that sent a quiet ache through the air. Neither pulled away, neither spoke. The moment stretched thin, suspended between what they felt and what they feared. When Caleb finally turned toward him, his voice was quiet, but steady. "Whatever this is." "It's not supposed to happen." Noah nodded, eyes fixed on the snow outside. "Maybe not. But it already is." The heater hummed softly. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine echoed faintly. Ryan returning, perhaps. The spell broke, but only just. Caleb took a step back, his hand falling to his side, eyes flickering with regret and something deeper. He whispered, "We should sleep." Noah watched him walk down the hall, the echo of his footsteps sinking into the quiet once more. The cabin felt emptier than before, but Noah knew it wasn't loneliness this time. It was the weight of something real, something beginning, even when it shouldn't. He sat by the fire until it burned low again, listening to the snow tap softly against the windows. Every sound, every flicker of light seemed to whisper the same thing. Some changes arrive quietly, but once they do, nothing ever feels the same again. The storm had softened by morning, leaving the world outside wrapped in a pale hush. Snow shimmered like glass under the gray light, and for a moment, everything looked untouched, pure, as if nothing had happened. But Noah knew that wasn't true. Something had shifted in the quiet between him and Caleb, something neither of them could name, but both could feel like a pulse beneath the stillness. Ryan's car pulled up just after sunrise. The crunch of tires against snow snapped Noah out of his thoughts. He'd fallen asleep on the couch, still wearing yesterday's sweater, the fire long since gone cold. When the door swung open, Ryan's voice filled the cabin again, bright, familiar, and too loud for the fragile peace that lingered. "Miss me?" he called, setting down grocery bags. Caleb came out of his room a few seconds later, his expression unreadable. Ryan wrapped his arm around him, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "Hope you two didn't die of boredom." Caleb smiled, thin and polite, the kind of smile meant for saving face. Noah forced a laugh and helped unpack the bags. Every word felt rehearsed, every glance too careful. Ryan noticed nothing. His cheerfulness filled every crack, every quiet space where truth might have slipped through. Breakfast passed with small talk. Ryan told stories from town, about traffic, about the gas station clerk who recognized him from high school. Caleb listened, nodding occasionally. Noah stayed mostly quiet, stirring his coffee until it went cold. His eyes flicked toward Caleb now and then. Each time, Caleb's gaze slid away just before it met his. Later, Ryan went upstairs to take a call. The moment his footsteps faded, silence returned like a sigh. Caleb was standing by the sink, rinsing a plate he didn't need to clean. Noah could see the tension in his shoulders. He walked over slowly, unsure of what he'd even say. "You don't have to pretend," he said softly. Caleb didn't look at him right away. "Pretend what?" "That nothing's different," Noah replied. "You don't have to lie, to me or to yourself." Caleb set the plate down and finally met his eyes. The distance between them felt impossibly small. "What do you want me to say, Noah? That last night meant something? That it scared me because it did?" His voice cracked a little on the last word. Noah didn't answer. He didn't trust himself to. The sound of Ryan's voice upstairs drifted faintly through the cabin, a reminder of the line they'd already crossed in silence. Caleb shook his head and turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. "It's complicated," he said finally. "It doesn't have to be," Noah said, though he knew it was a lie. Love, guilt, longing, none of it ever fit neatly into words. Caleb exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the window. "Ryan's not a bad person," he said quietly. "He just stopped seeing me somewhere along the way. And then you walked in, and for a second I felt seen again. That's all it was. Maybe that's all it should be." Noah wanted to believe that, but something in his chest ached at the thought. He took a step back, giving Caleb space. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Maybe some things aren't meant to last. But that doesn't mean they weren't real." Caleb turned toward him, eyes shining. Not from tears, but from the kind of clarity that hurts. "You make things harder, you know that?" he said with a sad smile. "Story of my life," Noah whispered. A car horn outside startled them both. Ryan, waving from the driveway, calling out that he was going into town again. "You two coming?" he asked cheerfully. Caleb called back, "We'll catch up later." Ryan shrugged and drove off, the sound fading into the trees. Caleb walked to the doorway of Noah's room. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said softly. "Ryan wants to head back early before the next snow hits." Noah nodded, trying to swallow the knot in his throat. "I figured." Caleb hesitated, then stepped closer. "For what it's worth. That night, it reminded me that I'm still capable of feeling something. Even if it was wrong." Noah met his gaze, steady but sad. "Maybe it wasn't wrong," he said. "Maybe it was just real. And real things don't always fit inside the rules we make for ourselves." Caleb didn't reply. Instead, he reached out, his hand barely brushing Noah's before pulling back. That single touch carried everything: confession, apology, gratitude. Then he turned and walked down the hall. The rest of the day drifted by quietly. Ryan returned in the afternoon, humming to himself, talking about packing up early. Noah helped him, smiling where he needed to, laughing at all the right times. Caleb kept his distance, though Noah could feel the weight of his silence from across the room. When morning came, the cabin was pale with early light. Snow dusted the trees again. Ryan loaded the car while Caleb stood by the porch steps, hands in his coat pockets. Noah walked out to say goodbye. Neither spoke at first. The air between them was cold, but not unfriendly, just full of things left unsaid. Caleb finally said, "Take care of yourself, Noah." "You too," Noah answered, forcing a small smile. "And thank you for the company." Caleb's lips parted, as if to say something more, but he didn't. He just nodded and turned toward the car. Noah watched him climb in beside Ryan, watched the taillights disappear through the snow-covered trees, until there was nothing left but silence again. He went back inside, the cabin suddenly feeling bigger, emptier. He made coffee, sat by the window, and opened his notebook. For the first time in months, words came easily. "Some winters change more than the weather," he wrote. "Some bring people you were never meant to keep, but can never forget." Outside, the snow kept falling, gentle and endless. Inside, Noah closed the notebook, took a slow breath, and whispered to the empty room. Everything changed that night. And maybe that's okay.